I started getting promoted in my career. I became a vice president at the bank, was having fun, making money, and then God showed up again. Hi, I'm Sister Josephine Garrett, and this is Ascension Presents. How did I end up Catholic? I am a native Texan, thank God. I love being a Texan. Grew up in Houston, Texas, and I grew up Baptist. We went to church all the time. I loved how I grew up. I really wouldn't change it. I learned how to be close to Jesus, to have a relationship with him, to see him in a very personal way. When I was 18 years old, I was getting ready to apply to colleges. I saw this college, and the tagline was that it was the University for Independent Thinkers, and I very much desired to be an independent thinker, and it was the University of Dallas. What I did not know is that it was Catholic. And so I got there, I realized something weird was going on. My parents came to bring the rest of my stuff, and they looked around and they also said, this place is weird, and then they drove off and left me there. I actually got to spend half a year living in Rome during the papacy of Pope St. John Paul II, and I have to say that's when I really fell in love with the Catholic Church. I fell in love with Pope St. John Paul II. For me, as a young Baptist girl, he was simply an amazing preacher. And he was talking about the God that I had always known, but he was taking me deeper and taking me higher, and I loved it. When my friends would use their 10-day breaks to go travel around Europe, I would stay in Rome so that I could hear him preach. And so when I returned from living in Rome, I joined a Latin liturgical choir, and it was in the context of that choir that I learned the Mass, and that I learned to fall in love with the Mass. So I continued as a University of Dallas student, sort of having a bit of an affair with the Catholic Church, but still Baptist. And then when I graduated from UD, I immediately started working in banking. And after a couple years working in banking, I worked really hard, and I have to admit that I became a bit of a workaholic. And after a couple of years of that, I missed church, and I was really surprised. I knew that I wanted to be like the women that I had grown up around. I grew up around a lot of women of deep faith. I knew that I wanted to be like them, but I was shocked to miss the Mass. And so I started thinking about maybe becoming Catholic. I was working at the bank, and these religious sisters would come into the bank to make deposits for their ministries, and I was the person who worked with the business accounts. And so it took a long time to do their business for them, so we would chat. And one of the religious sisters, she said to me one day, she said, "You know a lot about the Catholic Church." And I said, "I do. I went to University of Dallas." And she said, "But you seem to love it." And I said, "I do love the Catholic Church. I think it's beautiful." And she said, "Well, why aren't you Catholic?" And I couldn't answer her. And so she gave me a small Post-it with the number of the woman who ran RCIA at the parish near me. And I kept that Post-it note for months. And one night I called the number on it and entered RCIA and really never looked back. I became really passionate about my Catholic faith. A lot of people ask me how my family felt about me becoming Catholic. My parents are really laid back people, so they would tell people there are worse things this child can do than love Jesus. So my family was excited for me to be Catholic. I continued working in banking, and I thought that was it. I thought that I had checked the big religious box. I started getting promoted in my career. I became a vice president at the bank. I was an operations manager. I was a project manager, was having fun, making money, and then God showed up again. I had the privilege to go back to Rome, now Catholic. And I had been Catholic for 4 years, and I slowly started to be convicted, not for the things that I was doing, but for the things that I was not doing. So I was perceiving from the Holy Spirit a call to be more committed to my church and to God, and to show up for my church in really specific ways, and I wasn't doing it. I was lazy, and I wanted to watch Netflix on the weekends. I didn't want to serve. And so I'm back in Rome. I'm now Catholic, and I'm kneeling in a confessional in St. Peter's Basilica, and I'm confessing all of these omissions, all the things that I had perceived the Holy Spirit calling me to do, but I wasn't doing them. And the priest, I thought I was in the English stall. I was crying, and I finally finished my confession, and the priest said, "Que bella." And I was like, "Do you not speak English?" But I think he did. He absolved me in English at least. And he said 2 words to me. He said, just begin. I came back from Rome. I got a spiritual director to help me really learn to deepen my faith, and he taught me to pray. One day I was sitting in front of my spiritual director again, thinking that I was living the life that God was going to have me live for the next however many years, working in banking, being a career woman. And my spiritual director was great. He had told me that that was a ministry and an opportunity to minister through my work. But one day he asked me, he said to me, "What's your greatest hope?" And I looked at him and I said, "Well, Father, I hope to buy a house. I want a new car." And he said, "No, no, no. What's your greatest hope?" And I realized that the things that I hoped for were far from what God made me for. See, cars and houses and promotions and money, those are not bad things. Those are good things, but they are not what God made you for. And so this really good priest, he's challenged me to pray and talk to God about what he made me for. And so one day I was sitting chaperoning a youth retreat, and I was sitting before the Blessed Sacrament, and I was being obedient and praying that prayer. But I was also really grateful to want to be with youth on a Saturday at a retreat in front of the Blessed Sacrament. And so I was praying a prayer of thanksgiving. I was thanking God that he had formed my heart to want to be with these kids instead of being at home watching Netflix. I was thanking God for forming my heart to love him in the Eucharist. And in the middle of these prayers of thanksgiving, all of a sudden I thought this thought, it would be wonderful to be a sister and serve in the church. And I opened my eyes because I wondered who said that, because it couldn't have been me. And then from that point on, it was like I was haunted by the idea of this vocation. I went back to my spiritual director and told him that these thoughts were haunting me and I felt like I was losing my mind. And he said something really reassuring to me. He said, "If you're called to be a sister, it won't be tomorrow." And he challenged me to just visit some sisters. And because God is a provider and God always comes through for us and he doesn't play hide and seek with us, shortly after, a new friend that I had made who was discerning religious life, she asked me to be her wingman for a discernment retreat. And so I went with her and we visited Sisters of the Holy Family of Nazareth. 2 years later, I entered Sisters of the Holy Family of Nazareth as a candidate, and 3 years later, I served as that friend's maid of honor. So I took her spot in the convent, and she went on to get married. I chose Sisters of the Holy Family of Nazareth because really all of my big fears about being a religious sister were laid to rest among the Sisters of the Holy Family of Nazareth. I thought, if there was a mold that God made for nuns, not only would I not fit in it, I would definitely break it. But among Sisters of the Holy Family of Nazareth, there's this deep, deep space for differences among the sisters. And so we have this shared love for Jesus in common among us. And for some reason, that sets us free to be unique and diverse and still be family. And I also felt like some of the gifts that I had gained in the banking industry, my gifts for leadership, I found in the Sisters of the Holy Family of Nazareth that these could be used and shared and seen as gift and not something that I had to hide away to be a religious sister. So being with the sisters really bore the fruit of joy in me. And I also noticed like I was set free to live life more virtuously, and I had the graces to do so. In the context of community life, I was accomplishing feats of virtue that I knew were only God's power because I'm just not naturally that virtuous. And so that's how I knew that it was where I needed to stay, because I saw God's life growing in me and God's life growing in me, bearing fruit that was immeasurable and calculable, and it was impossible for this to be according to my own strength. And so I knew that I was where God wanted me to be. I've been a Sister of the Holy Family of Nazareth for 14 years. I now serve as a licensed professional counselor. A lot of people ask me how my family felt about me becoming a sister. It was harder for them. But one of the greatest lessons that I learned in walking with my family and my vocation, because it's their vocation too, they come along on the journey, One of the greatest lessons that I learned is that God gave me a lot of years to find him in this vocation, and I need to let God give my family that same kind of time. So now my family's in a really good place 14 years later. That's not where it started. And I really couldn't be more grateful. I tell people all the time that I am so glad I am not who I thought I wanted to be. And I'm so grateful to be who God is telling me I'm called to be. God bless.